Hello there, welcome to Wake Up to the Bible. I'm Daniel. I'm here with my father, Dr. Kaplan. Together, we're going through the books of the law, Genesis through Deuteronomy, over the course of this year, so a little bit every day. We'll be reading the portion, and then we're going to be discussing what we thought of it. Today, we are reading Genesis 23, 1 through 16, and I'm going to be reading from the Robert Alter translation. And Sarah's life was 127 years, the years of Sarah's life. And Sarah died in Kirjath Arba, which is in Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came to mourn Sarah and to keen for her. And Abraham rose from before his dead, and he spoke to the Hittites, saying, I am a sojourner settler with you. Grant me a burial holding with you, and let me bury my dead now before me. And the Hittites answered Abraham, saying, Pray, hear us, my lord. You are a prince of God among us. In the pick of our graves bury your dead. No man among us will deny you his grave for burying your dead. And Abraham rose and bowed to the folk of the land, to the Hittites, and he spoke with them, saying, If you have it in your hearts that I should bury my dead now before me, hear me, entreat for me Ephron son of Zohar, and let him grant me the cave of Machpelah that belongs to him, which is at the far end of the field. And at the full price let him grant it to me in your midst as a burial holding. And Ephron was sitting in the midst of the Hittites, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the hearing of the Hittites, all the assembly in the gate of his town, saying, Pray, my lord, hear me. The field I grant you, and the cave that is in it. I grant it to you in full view of my kinfolk. I grant it to you. Bury your dead. And Abraham bowed before the folk of the land, and he spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the folk of the land, saying, If you would but hear me, I give the price of the field. Take it from me, and let me bury my dead there. And Ephron answered Abraham, saying, Pray, my lord, hear me. Land for 400 silver shekels between me and you. What does it come to? Go bury your dead. And Abraham heeded Ephron, and Abraham weighed out to Ephron the silver that he spoke of in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 silver shekels at the merchant's tried weight. This is a very interesting passage that gets into what may seem like a rather, I don't know, obscure detail in Abraham's life, but certainly it's here for a reason. Uh, the first thing that comes to my mind is obviously how this begins, and it's talking about Sarah's life. And as far as I know, Sarah is the only person that we get the longevity of in the Bible. Is that correct? That we find out the age that they died? Is that right? Or it's one of the few. It's
The the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are mentioned. It's the first female uh, that we know of that has her age, and maybe there aren't that many. Also, when I think about it, I think it's one of the few women that where you have the age there. I have to think about other women down the line. It's hard for
I
me. I
don't
don't think
think you
you
ever
ever
hear
hear
it
it again
again for
for age.
age.
Yeah, I don't know if Miriam's age is
I
given.
don't think so.
Yeah, so it's special with Sarah as a female given the age of her death.
But what I think is interesting about that is that you have the way he translates it. You know, Sarah's life was 127 years, the years of Sarah's life. The emphasis is on the life and not the dead. And you know, God is the God of not the dead but the living. We remember people's life, you know, and it's the life that matters. I think it's just very important, especially when you're talking about, you know, a funeral preparation, that the important thing is the legacy, what the life was. What are some of the things that come to your mind when you read through this section?
Uh, this is important for the um, one of the important promises given to Abraham as part of his responsibility spiritually is that he will be put in a certain location. God had in mind to give a territory, a base to Abraham and the descendants that go that inherit the covenant, and this goes all the way through into the millennium. You know that Zion is from Zion goes forth the law, and people are coming to Jerusalem, and so that the promise of the land is important. So here you have Abraham and Hebron actually purchasing a cave that can become a tomb for the patriarchs, and over the centuries, the couples are buried there. Machpelah, uh, whatever geographical reason for that name, but it has to do with coupling. So there may be some geographic feature originally that gave the basis of the name, but now it's the tomb of the couples, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah, and he actually purchases Hebron, and the area of Hebron has been uh, very important in Hebrew thinking from that point on, all through the centuries. Even when very few Jews were living in the land of Israel, there was a community existing in Hebron all through those centuries. It finally wasn't driven out until the 20th century for a period of time, and then after the 67 war, once again, Jews went back to Hebron, and they're there now. Although overwhelmingly the area is Arab, but there's a Jewish presence there, as there had been over the centuries. And of course, the tomb itself, Herod built a structure over it, which is still there. There's a Herodian structure that is there over the tombs of the patriarchs. So it has a significance in that sense. And related to that is something I wanted to mention. As we come to the beginning of the Bible, the account of creation, there's a traditional medieval commentary, the commentary of Rashi, which Orthodox Jews still study. And by the way, it is in that commentary where we find the comment that Abraham took only Eliezer, and that's based on a Talmudic tradition. Rashi preserves a lot of the Talmudic traditions about the Bible. Right. So anyway, but Rashi says something interesting about Genesis 1. He says the Bible should begin with Exodus 12 because or the Torah, because it's a book of commandments, it's a book of law. So we have in Genesis 12, God specifically says this month is your beginning of months, and then he commands concerning the Passover. So Rashi says, why begin the account here? So Rashi's comment is, and as I said, Orthodox Jews have been studying this for centuries. Rashi's comment is that we begin with creation to show that God is master of the world. He created the world, so he can decide who lives where. And so he gave the promised land to the people of Israel, and he has a right to do that, and they have a right, therefore, to that land. So it just shows how important that was in the theological thinking of the Jews all through history. So I thought I'd make that comment.
Yeah, I would say that what I get out of this is you get a little bit more about the way that Abraham operated as a person, which is helpful just to flesh out the character and the person, what we understand about him. But then you also get an interesting little like not a parable because I think it actually happened, but you get an interesting little story about some dealings going on here. Because first of all, what we do get immediately is, Abraham is mourning for Sarah, so that tells you something. It wasn't just a business arrangement, in case you were wondering, which you could technically if the Bible didn't explicitly say so, right? So you have that. You have the importance of burying the dead. Quickly. This is still a Jewish custom. It's like the person dies and you want to get it taken care of. There's a certain amount of respect there for the dead. But what I find interesting is when he's doing this dealings for the cave, first he goes to the guy, and the guy's like, "Well, I'm just going to give it to you, but I'm going to give it to you in front of everybody, and and I'm going to look all magnanimous and all charitable and everything." And Abraham, obviously, we've already established from what it says, wasn't poor. He didn't really need the charity, and I think he was making a point that he didn't want to be given it lest somebody could say something later. So he's like, "Well, just give me a fair price for it." And immediately the guy switches, right? The guy goes from so charitable in front of everybody to what I've seen. It was actually a pretty ridiculously high price for what it is, based on what people assume the 400 silver shekels being referred to here. It sounds like an awful lot. I've seen different speculation because we don't exactly know monetary value for that time, but it sounds like a lot, like an awful lot. And I just think it is an important principle. There are the lots of people that will talk the talk, but they won't walk the walk. Or if you offer them the opportunity, well, they're just going to switch on a dime on you. And even in this situation, though, Abraham is very respectful because he's like, well, if you would let me do it this way. He's a good negotiator. It's probably one reason why he was able to amass his wealth. Something to keep in mind. Other thoughts that you had about this passage there?
Remember that the patriarchs were sojourners in the land. So Abraham, you see here, is really a vulnerable minority. He's very careful, very respectful the way he deals with the Hittites. And also, one wonders about the sincerity of the original offer, whether he had the idea that now Abraham wouldn't just take it. And so when he finally does give him a price, he gives him, I think, probably a high price. But Abraham doesn't quibble either. He goes ahead and does it. So he must have been quite a wealthy man. But also, you see that he wants to be careful not to offend his hosts here.
Yeah, and you'll also notice that he goes out of, well, I don't know if it's out of his way. It was probably a typical practice, but he does weigh and everything. He doesn't just say, well, my honor is good. This is what you want. And, he does make it clear to the person that this is, that he made a deal and he is fulfilling his deal, on the nose to the letter. And considering what's probably an economic differential between the two people, that's admirable and just something to notice. Um, and of course, to my dad's point, considering what would ultimately happen with some of those areas in the land, I think the idea of establishing from the get-go of this buying it versus the conquering of it is interesting. It's something to definitely keep in mind in terms of the history of that region of the world.
Now, I deal with technicalities often. In the second verse, when it says that Abraham came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her, I think Robert Alter had some other verb there, but the scribes in the word weep, the middle letter of that root is a kaf, and the kaf is written very small. You could check me out if you want to look at the Hebrew text. So why is the kaf written very small? Well, one concept would be that Abraham wept for her, but not uh, beyond what would be appropriate. And you can go to First Thessalonians, that people who have a hope, the hope of the resurrection, don't mourn as do others who don't have that hope. You could tie that in with that, what Paul says in First Thessalonians, the fourth chapter. Now, I'm not saying dogmatically that's why the cuff is written small, but that is a general idea that you often read.
Yeah, that's very interesting. It's something too that you just don't think about, that there might have been other artistic devices that were being used in order to make points. Um, and this doesn't mean you have to go off the rails theologically about it, because these are artistic devices used to make a point. And certainly the text plainly, to my dad's point, makes the same point, right? We have other verses to tell us these principles. So just because the person's using that artistic device in the situation doesn't mean, for those who don't notice that artistic device, that they're like lost or something. It's just something to pick up on perhaps. And we also could be completely wrong, and maybe there's another reason. All right. So, do you have any other thoughts about this chapter? Oh, wait, I had something. So, this is another kind of technical point, but when it says Sarah's life was 127 years, 127 does appear again in the book of Esther, where the king offers the 127 provinces, right? And so some people say, well, this is kind of a story about Sarah going into the place, and it's like, well, one of Sarah's descendants eventually would be offered this whole kingdom, which is really what Sarah should have gotten, what she would have been owed if life was, completely fair. I don't know. I just think that's kind of fun, kind of interesting, something you can take from that. But it certainly there is a progression, that is true, and Sarah is the ancestor of a vast kingdom. So
Uh, Abraham was is going to be Av Hamon Goyim, the father of a multitude of nations. So his name goes from Avram, exalted father, to Avraham, which God explains as the father of many nations. And so God adds the letter Hey to his name, which is the fifth letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And in the Bible, five symbolizes God's love often. And then in the case of Sarah's name, she's Sarai, which possibly could have meant something like Dolores, like pains. But then he calls her Sarah, meaning princess, and so in that sense he takes a yud away, but he adds a hey to her name. What's also interesting, whatever you want to make of it, is that if you took the name Abraham and Sarah, Avram and Sarai have a certain numerical value. Now you added a five to Abraham's name, but you took five away from Sarah's name. She went from Sarai to Sarah. So after the changes, their names still have the same numerical value when you put them together. It's just something interesting that that I thought I would bring up at this point.
again, something a little detail you might find fun. All right, so if you are enjoying this show, and I'm sure you are, please like, subscribe, hit the bell, tell your friends, share it with others, because this is a great year to read through the books of the law. Otherwise, we will see you tomorrow.